Let's pray. Dear God, as we come together, I pray that you would bless this time in the Word, and that you would just challenge all of us in this area of burnout. Lord, that we could have peace, a peace of mind as we deal with the trauma in our lives, as we deal with the negative thoughts in our lives, as we deal with even sadness, depression, grief, as we seek you, Lord, in these different situations, whether it's hardship or the hardship of someone else that's close to us. Lord, I pray, Lord, that you would help us to be willing to do the things that are necessary to have a peace of mind. And Lord, that you would use this service, that you would use this time in your word to do that. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we're talking about burnout today. And so do you feel like you're at a breaking point in your life? Maybe it's spiritually, maybe it's mentally, maybe it's physically, emotionally. Maybe it's your workplace. You're at this breaking point in your work, and so on. Jesus wants us to come to him and to have rest. He wants to give us rest. Look at this passage. It's Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. It says, "Come to me." This is Jesus. He's saying, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The word here for labor in the Greek, it means to be exhausted from work. You you're just depleted. And so just mentally exhausted, physically exhausted. That's that idea. He says, all who labor. And then he says, and are heavy laden. That word in the Greek for tidzo, it means to be overloaded with burden, kind of like it's sometimes used as a ship is overloaded, not stocked to capacity, but over. It's loaded far over its capacity. And maybe that's you today. You're overloaded with burden, hardship. And Jesus is saying here, it's an invitation. He's saying, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." And so this morning, that's what we're talking about. Come to me, and I will give you rest. Never resting doesn't accelerate the work of God in our lives. There's not resting only corrupts the work of God in our lives. There's old saying, this understanding that about burning the candle at both ends, and the answer to burnout is not to quit. The answer is to get rest. The answer is to allow Jesus to give you rest as you come to him. And so we have to learn how to be on God's path and to work at his pace. And so this morning, as we think about this, burnout is not a badge of honor. Burning the candle at both ends is not a badge of honor or a trophy that we can be esteemed for. There's this popular saying that it's better to burn out than to rust out. The problem with that mentality, or that idea, living by that idea, is the fact that in the end, both of you are out. And God says, I'm going to want to give you rest. During a pivotal part of the war, a point in the war, World War II, Winston Churchill was stuck in a bomb shelter, and as Germany just kept bombing them day and night, and they had already run through France and defeated them, and they were coming to England to defeat them. And Churchill was able to conduct the business of England and be able to direct the war as their leader from there. But it was taking a physical and a mental toll on him. So one day, against many people's wishes, Churchill returned to his country home. He was not as safe. I'm sure he had lots of people with him protecting him, but he was not nearly as safe out there in that country home as he was in that bunker. But and he got down on his knees in the dirt, and he started to take care of his roses. He loved roses, and he loved caring for them and growing them and nurturing them. And not everybody thought this was a good way to spend his time at this moment. And one particular person said, "Mr. Churchill, why are you doing this? There's a war. We could lose it. We could lose the free world. And you are spending time in a rose garden." And so he replied, he says, "No, you do not understand. If I keep staying in that bomb shelter, giving orders and hearing about all the things that are happening, and keep using the same part of my mind all the time and making decisions to push this war effort forward, I am going to get empty. I have to remove myself from that arena and go to an opposite field, something I thoroughly enjoy, that restores the portion of my creativity and the decision-making ability. So when I come back to the war room, I am refreshed, I am alert, and I make proper decisions." You see, Churchill understands something that everybody else around him at that moment had either forgotten or just didn't understand. Being burned out is not a trophy or a badge of honor. He understood that sometimes the most important thing we can do is to rest, is to do something different. So the main idea this morning is sometimes the most spiritual thing we can do is rest. Elijah was a prophet in a very difficult time in Israel's history. And he was more like you and I than what you probably realize at this moment. In fact, you should not think of Elijah as being this superhuman guy that always did the right thing. He wasn't. In fact, James 5:17 tells us this. It says, Elijah was a man with a nature like ours. He was normal, like us. And so the context of this story that we're going to read in 1 Kings chapter 19 is that Elijah gave a prophecy about 3 years prior to this, that there would be no rain in Israel because they had forsaken the covenant of God that he had made with them. And so it was going to rain, and they had worshiped Baal, and because of that, there wouldn't be no rain it would be 3 years, but he said, until I say it's going to rain. And so a drought is a farmer's greatest nightmare first, and then it becomes everybody else's greatest nightmare because eventually the food is gone. And it affects everyone. Now, there was another prophet at this time, a very faithful prophet, Obadiah. Obadiah and King Ahaz were out looking for some water. And And so Elijah was hiding from King Ahaz because King Ahaz had scoured the country and the countries around him for Elijah because he wanted to kill him because he had made this prophecy. And there was his wife, Jezebel, who was just absolutely evil. And they were out searching, Obadiah and King Ahaz. They were searching for water. And at one point, King Ahaz said, oh, you need to go this way, I need to go there. We need to split up. And so they did that. Well, just how it goes happened to be, like God arranged it, that Obadiah would meet Elijah. And Obadiah was happy to see Elijah, but Elijah said, hey, I need you to arrange a meeting between me and the king. And Obadiah is like, oh man, that's going to get me killed. Because what's going to happen is I'm going to go and tell him that you are over here and that he wants to meet with you. And then when I take the king there, God's going to take you out. You won't be there, and he's going to be mad and he's going to kill me. And Elijah says, no, just do it. And so he did that. And they're on Mount Carmel. And this big showdown happens with the 450 prophets, false prophets of Baal and Elijah. And it's a great story. It's in 1 Kings chapter 18. If you're not familiar with that, you should read it. But it was like the Super Bowl, like winning the Super Bowl. Elijah was used of God to do something so miraculous. At one point in that story, it's so funny because he is making fun of these false prophets that are calling on Baal to come and light their altar on fire. And he says, well, maybe he's just distracted. Just cry a little louder. Or maybe he's in the restroom. Maybe he's relieving himself. Cry a little louder. Or maybe he's asleep. You're just not loud enough. And of course, you know what happens. And then it's literally like what happened this past week with the Super Bowl celebration in Kansas City. It's supposed to be a magnificent time. You're celebrating, the whole city's celebrating together, but then you get word that someone has died. Someone got shot. And it's crazy. That shouldn't be. It's like Elijah won the Super Bowl, but yet now he is mourning. And we pick this up in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 1, and it says, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Elijah said, hey, after the false prophets were killed and God did the fire from above and that he told King Ahaz, you need to get home because if you don't get home, it's going to rain and this place that's all dust is going to just turn to mud, and your chariots will be stuck in it like a snowstorm, right? And so he told him to go home. So he goes home. He tells his wife what happened, and this is what she said. She says, then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life as the life of one of them, those Baal prophets, those 450 Baal prophets, by this time tomorrow. Then he was afraid, and he arose and he ran for his life, and he came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servants there. So we see here what happened. We don't know exactly what the process was that he was, but we know in the King James Version, that verse 3, it says, when he saw that, he arose and he went. It doesn't say that he's afraid, but from the context, we know that he feared for his life. He separated himself from that, and he got far away from that. And the threat in his life prompted him to do something drastic. And he loved his country. He loved the people. He loved God. And he he was so disappointed at this point. It was such a letdown. It was so depleting to him that he would go from this moment where he probably thought, hey, our country's going to start loving God again and living according to the covenant. And then he gets this word, you're going to die. And so he left. And today I want to look at, from the rest of this story, beating burnout requires us to do three essential steps. The first one is we must know and acknowledge the symptoms of burnout. You're like that old saying, you have to admit, admitting is the first step to getting help, right? That's basically this. Look at verse 4. It says, but he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under the broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, it is enough now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And he lay down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate, and he drank, and he laid down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise, eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and he ate and he drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. And so we're going to look at some symptoms that Elijah had that showed that he was burnt out. The first one was despair. In verse 4, we see that he said, I just want to die. It's enough. Oh Lord, take away my life. He was in complete despair. Also, he had self-deprecation. He said, I just want to die. Take my life. I don't deserve to live. He felt like a failure. He lost his desire so much that he just wanted life to end. And then he was completely exhausted. He lay down and he slept under a tree. I'm sure that was comfortable. But he fell asleep. They woke him up. He ate. He fell back asleep. I mean, he was tired. We don't know how. It doesn't say how long he slept, but it sounds like he slept for a long time. He slept enough that he could travel for 40 days and 40 nights. He ate enough that he was rested for 40 days and 40 nights. And then we also see in the next part, I'm going to read this from 9 to 14, and it shows us some more ideas or symptoms of his burnout. It says there, he came to a cave and he lodged in it, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous or zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke it in pieces, the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord is not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloth, and he went out and he stood at the entrance of the cave. And behold, there came a voice to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars killed your prophets with a sword, and I, even I only, am left. And they seek my life to take it away. We see some other symptoms here. He was angry. You just see that in the words. He said that his people had forsaken the covenant. That was a drastic understatement. But he was angry. He was resentful about that. He was resentful probably because of the situation that he was in, the threat that was on his life. He had already been in hiding for over 3 years. Now his life was threatened again. There was a lot to be angry about. There's a lot to be resentful about. And then there's the isolation. He said, even only I am left. He thought he was all alone. And these are all ideas, the despair, the self-deprecation, the exhaustion, the anger, the resentment, the loneliness. They're all symptoms of burnout. There's so many more other symptoms. You can do some research. Chat GPT, I mean, you can go on there, you can go on and Google, just everything, like do some good research. Not everybody's symptoms are the same. There's physical symptoms like headaches, muscle pain, stomach issues, fatigue, frequent illnesses, the loss of appetite, sleeping problems, low performance at work, in any situation, and then lack of exercise, just the motivation. And then the mental part is the mental exhaustion, the lacking motivation, the feeling drained, the negativity. You can't control the negative thoughts that are just running wild in your mind. Depression, lack of focus, sadness, irritability. And then, of course, the spiritual side, sin. You just aren't as concerned about sin in your life when you're burned out. And so Catherine Kendall Tackett, a PhD, she wrote this about this is a really amazing quote. It says, burnout can be defined as a loss of enthusiasm. So a loss of enthusiasm, loss of energy, idealism, perspective, and purpose. It has been described as trying to run a marathon at full speed. You just can't do that. You just can't try. You have to pace yourself in a marathon. Another analogy is like setting out on a journey that goes from coast to coast, only having a quarter tank of gas and having no resources to fill it. You're not going to get too far. That's what burnout does for us. In a burnout-focused study, 52% of the participants said that they felt that they were burnt out. They described themselves as being burned out, that they had enough of these symptoms that they were I'm just depleted. So, do you feel spent today? Do you feel like you're just done with life at times? We need to determine what depletes us, but first we have to acknowledge that we are on our way to burnout or we are burnt out. Because if we don't admit it first, we will not seek the help that we need. And we must know and acknowledge the symptoms of burnout before we can get help. So the second point this morning is that we must know and reject common mistakes caused by burnout. We can see that Elijah makes some very common mistakes that all those symptoms running around in our minds and our bodies can cause us to make. And so just the hype of, hey, he had won the Super Bowl, but then it was such a letdown when he was told that his life was in jeopardy. The first mistake that he made is he focused on his feelings over facts. The same God that rained down fire on the altar was the same God that could protect him from Jezebel. But yet, when he got that threat, he abandoned the facts and he went with his feelings. That's a common mistake that can happen to us anytime. If we trust our feelings are usually not a good indication of reality. And then there's comparing ourselves to others. When Elijah asked God to take his life, he also said, I am no better than my fathers. He must have felt, I'm a failure. Because what he's talking about, all these prophets that went before him, what happened to them? Well, a lot of them were killed by the evil kings of Israel. There wasn't one single king that did, in the end, that said about his life that he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. Not one in Israel. And he said, I'm just like them. I'm a walking dead man. It's only a matter of time. And he compared himself to them. I'm a failure. There's a quote by Teddy Roosevelt. He said, comparison is the thief of joy. We can't compare ourselves. The only comparison that we need is to compare ourselves to Jesus, which we never measure up. And we always have work that's what we're working towards. That's the only productive comparison in our lives. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 says, not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by another and compare themselves with another, they are without understanding. So comparing ourselves is not wise. And then there's this focusing on the negative or blame shifting, blaming others or blaming ourselves. It's not productive. It's that type of focus never gets us anywhere. Elijah had that. He said, it's enough. That's what he declared to God. It's enough. We do this. We say things like, I've had enough. I've had enough of you. I've had enough of this job. I've had enough. Enough is enough. Why? Because we need to be in control. We need to be in control. So, we're blame shifting. We blame others. In reality, no one has to be at blame, or we blame ourselves. So we focus on the negative. And then we exaggerate our circumstances. A very common mistake that we made. He said, I alone am left here. It's only me. I'm the only one that cares about you, God. Everybody else, they've lost their way. Is that true? No, that's not true. In fact, there was Obadiah. Obadiah was a faithful servant of God, a prophet of God. And then in 1 Kings 19, verse 18, it says in God's instruction to him, he informs him, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. So there were 7,000 other people that had kept the covenant. He wasn't alone, but he was burnt out, and he exaggerated his circumstances. See, God knows the big picture. And the same God The same God that did all the things in the Old Testament and all the things in the New Testament, the same God is available to us wherever we're at. He has the big picture. Our picture is small, and we are just so small in this whole big thing. We trust God's plan. We trust his pace in life. And so the amazing illustration for this is that we are not defined by our failures of the past. We're not defined by those. That's another mistake. We can allow all of our mistakes that we made can define us rather than allowing God to define us. How does he define us? Just one way is in John 15, where he talks about how he is the vine and we are the branches. That if we abide in him and he abides in us, that we'll bear much fruit. And here's a picture of a vine and the branches. The vine is the vertical part on the bottom, and the lateral part going in both directions from the vine. That's the vine. And the vertical pieces that go up and are held up by the wires, those are us. Those are the branches. That's what bears fruit, right? And if you disconnect the branch from the vine, it dies. It can't bear fruit. This is how Jesus describes us, that if we abide in him, we have life. We produce fruit. He has amazing view of us, but sometimes we can't see it, and we live like complete failures of our past. So don't let the failures of your past define your future. So the first point is we must know and acknowledge the symptoms, and then we know and reject the common mistakes caused by burnout. And lastly, we must know and apply the remedy. A remedy for burnout. It's 5 things. The first one is resting. We see that Elijah did that. He rested. He slept. But resting is more than sleep. Sleeping is definitely a part of it. And if we're not getting the proper sleep, that's one of the things that will wear us out really quick. But it's also doing something that we love that's outside our work. It's doing something like with our family. It's doing something that gets us disconnected, kind of like what Winston Churchill did in the peak of the war. He got down in the dirt and he cared for his roses, something that he loved to do. I don't know what that is for you, but we need things that gets us disconnected and helps us get a different perspective. Resting is a very important aspect. We see that he did that, and it's also good nourishment. Resting is taking care of our body. Maybe that's exercise, eating healthy, whatever, but it's part of resting. We're to Sabbath. We're to Sabbath weekly. And there's also releasing. This releasing, we see it in Elijah. Elijah in the cave, he called out to God, and even in the broom tree, he called out to God. And he was venting, he was releasing. What he was saying wasn't always correct, but he was releasing. And he was releasing it to the right person, God. But prayer is so much more than just venting to God or to word vomit to him the things that we think we need or want. It's more than that. Prayer is about listening, hearing God. You see in this passage that God's still small voice, God was not in the wind. God was not in the earthquake. God was not in the fire. He was in the quiet voice. And that is our word. Today, that is our word. So when we're praying, we should be reading the word of God. We should be hearing him. We should be asking. We should be taking time to say, hey, Lord, speak to me. Help me hear you. Help me understand you. Help me understand your plan. Help me to understand your pace in this world, in my life. Releasing and then refocusing. Elijah had to refocus both his path and his pace. He had gotten ahead of God. He thought, oh man, God, you're going to just, Israel's going to just follow you now. But that reality was shaken so badly because God was in it for the long haul. And even though King Ahaz may have listened to Elijah on Mount Carmel and did exactly what he was supposed to, Elijah told him to do, Jezebel wasn't going to do what Elijah wanted him to do. She was evil. And God's plan incorporated taking care of her eventually as well. You keep reading in 2 Kings. You read 2 Kings, you'll understand what happens to Jezebel. You'll understand what happened to those that bent their knee to Baal. Refocus. Colossians 3, verses 1 and 2, it says, if then we have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above where Christ is, or not on things on the earth. So refocusing. Refocus our lives, our minds on what needs to matter. In burnout, we can just get our focus off and get it on the negative, and we got to refocus. So resting, releasing, refocusing, and then recommitting. This is a huge one. Elijah recommitted. Now, how do we know that? Because if you continue on in this story, you see that the last part of chapter 19, what is he doing? He's out recruiting Elisha. Elisha is going to take his place. And he's doing the plan that God gave him in this story. So he recommitted to doing the work that God had called him to do. And we do too. We need to have a recommittal service every week. And I've just heard so many times, and I'm just like, if you said this, I'm not coming at you. I'm just saying, I've heard so many people say, Sunday is my only day off, and I just need to rest. And it's like that excuse not to come and be in God's house. And if we're God's children, I mean, this is a resting place. It should not drain you. If it drains us, we're doing something wrong. I'm doing something wrong. You're doing something wrong. I don't know, but it should not. It should not deplete you. It should actually build you up. It should give you more energy. It should be the highlight of our week. So recommit and then recruit. Recruiting. We see that Hazael and Jehu and Elisha were all recruited. God told him to recruit these ones. And sometimes in ministry, especially in ministry. Like if you're on the job and if you're not making the decision on who's hired, you can't really recruit anybody. But here in the church, we sometimes have people that are doing too much, and then we have other people that aren't doing anything. And what we need to do is, for the ones that are doing too much, we need to slow you down a little bit and pick up the pace for those that aren't doing anything, and we need to work together. And sometimes we're doing things that are outside of our talent or our giftedness, and that takes more energy. And for a season, that's okay, but for the long haul, we need to use our giftedness and how we serve. And so it's about recruiting as well. So it's not enough to know the remedy, because if we're not applying it, it's kind of like a gym membership that you never go to the gym. We need to implement the remedy. And so one of the greatest illustrations of this, and for almost everything, is Jesus. You can see as you read the pages of the Gospels, you can see that Jesus rested. He got himself apart, and he spent time with the Lord. I don't know if he had any hobbies. I'm guessing he was a bowler. I just think that he probably loved bowling, but maybe you think it's something else. But I know that he rested. And then I know that he also released. He spent time with his Father, and he talked to him, and he listened. In fact, the Bible says that in the Gospels, it says that he didn't do anything that his Father didn't tell him not to do, he didn't do anything that his Father didn't tell him to do. He did everything. He had that relationship. He had that release. He went to the synagogue. And then he refocused. And you can see that. You can see refocus and recommitting in the garden just hours before he would be crucified. Minutes before he would be arrested, he was in the garden. And what did he say? He said, "Not my will, but your will be done." I'm recommitting. I'm refocusing. I know what's ahead of me is going to be big. It's going to be hard. It's going to be painful. But I'm recommitting. I'm refocusing. I'm refocusing on what you will do in other people's lives so that they can be saved. And then the recruiting. He had 12 disciples that he poured into for 3.5 years. So you can see all of these things: resting, releasing, refocusing, recommitting, and recruiting in just Jesus' life. And so this morning, I encourage you, if Jesus invested in these things, how much more are we? We need to. So we must know and acknowledge the symptoms, know and reject common mistakes, and know and apply the remedy for burnout. Do you feel you are getting burned out, or you're at the breaking point? Have you felt that in the past? Jesus tells us again in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all you are heavy laden and are burdened, or labor and heavy burden, and I will give you rest." The rest that he gives us is good, and it's perfect. And so the next steps here this morning, as we bring this to a close, is to discuss the symptoms. If you have these symptoms, so there's about 50% of the people, if that study is correct, about 50% of the people felt like they were burning out. They describe themselves as having some of these symptoms. And if that's the case, half of you, half of us are feeling that. And so acknowledge that with somebody and allow them to help you. do that. If you don't admit it, it probably won't get any better. And as my daughter told me last week, what you don't work out, you will act out. And so if you continue to stay in this burden, this place of burnout, it will pay dividends that you don't want to pay or receive. And then start a discussion with someone that you do see. So half of you are feeling it, half of you aren't. Be the blessing in somebody's life that is. Maybe you recognize somebody in your life that has these symptoms and you should want to help them. Be the source of healing in somebody's life. Start a discussion with them to help them understand that. Share this message with them so that they can see what God says about it. And then rest. Rest. Rest in Him. Rest in the fact that He wants you to have rest. Live the way He wants you to live. Sometimes the most spiritual thing that you can do is to rest. And so I encourage you to do that this morning. Apply this remedy. Help somebody else to apply the remedy. And see God work.
He'll fix my eyes on Jesus Christ. I'll say that it is well.